Welcome to this deep dive. Today we're looking at something I think a lot of us have felt, even if we couldn't name it. It's that high-performing team that, on the surface, is just crushing it. Hitting every metric, launching on time, but underneath there's this invisible toxicity, this decay. Our mission today is to get past those performance reports and find what we're calling the behavioral truth of why these teams fall apart.
That phrase, behavioral truth, is so important because organizations, they're built to measure outputs. They track revenue, they track deadlines, they track all the lagging indicators. But the real story, the one that predicts the future, isn't in the spreadsheet. And that's the paradox, isn't it? These teams almost never have a big, dramatic implosion. It's not a single event, it's an erosion, a quiet, slow decay that can go on for months, even years.
So people are just burning themselves out to keep the numbers up while the system itself is failing.
Exactly, through sheer inertia or individual heroics. So to really understand it, we have to stop looking at the team as just a list of people doing tasks. We need to see it as an ecosystem, a living thing where the behavioral patterns are what determine if it lives or dies.
Okay, so if it's an ecosystem, we need a way to measure its health. And for that, we're going to lean on a framework, a kind of a diagnostic tool. It's this four-part chain. Identity leads to behavior, which shapes your story, and that creates your signal.
Right, and we usually use that to talk about individuals' career, their professional brand, so to speak. But it's an incredibly powerful diagnostic when you apply it to a whole system.
How so?
Well, think about it. In a healthy system, that chain is strong and coherent. My professional identity, who I am, what I value, it translates directly into my behavior, my actions. And those consistent actions create a reliable story about me, which sends a trustworthy signal to everyone else. You can count on me to act this way. That alignment creates integrity.
And the collapse starts when that chain breaks.
Precisamente. It starts when the ecosystem, maybe because of fear or ambiguity or just bad leadership, forces people to act in ways that contradict their identity. So I have to become guarded or political or secretive. My behavior no longer matches my identity. That creates a misaligned signal. And when everyone is sending out these distorted, untrustworthy signals, collective trust evaporates.
So before we get into the decay, let's paint a picture of the opposite. What does that healthy, high-integrity ecosystem actually look like at its peak? What's the behavioral baseline we're even aiming for?
The baseline is what we call behavioral clarity.
Behavioral clarity.
Yeah. It means that what people do, their actions are consistent, they're intentional, and they're very clearly aligned with the team's mission. This is so much more than just everyone being nice to each other. It's about being predictable in a good way, especially when the stakes are high. And that requires something we call successful self-translation.
Okay, self-translation, that's a new one for me. Let's dig into that. What does that mean?
It's the active work of making sure your actions reflect your intentions. So if your professional identity is, say, I'm a creative problem solver, then your behavior has to back that up. You should be asking tough questions, challenging assumptions, exploring new ideas. But if your actual behavior is just, playing it safe, avoiding any kind of disagreement,
Then your signal is lying.
your signal is lying, exactly. You're broadcasting a contradiction. Successful self-translation is about actively closing that gap.
And when everyone on a team is doing that work, the collective result is a massive reserve of trust.
A huge reserve. It's reinforcing because if your identity and signal are aligned, I don't have to waste my mental energy trying to figure out your hidden agenda. I can predict how you'll react under pressure. And that psychological safety lets the whole team operate at a much higher level. The currency of trust is just abundant.
All right, so let's get really specific with the warning signs. We've seen models that map out, 13 key behavioral domains that define how we operate at work. We can't go through all 13, but which are the canaries in the coal mine? Which ones signal decay first?
Right. That list has everything from things like influence and foresight to self-management. But the ones that are most vulnerable, because they absolutely depend on trust and vulnerability, are a few key ones. Definitely conflict resolution, team development, and inclusive collaboration. But I'd also add feedback seeking and foresight to that list because watching how they fail under pressure tells you almost everything you need to know.
Okay, 5 critical domains. Let's use those as our baseline for health. First up, conflict resolution.
This is the big one. Healthy conflict resolution is really the clearest sign of psychological safety. It's the team's ability to debate an idea, a strategy, a high-stakes issue, the task without it becoming personal, without it becoming an attack on someone's identity.
So you can argue about the what without damaging the who.
Perfectly put. If a team can do that and walk away still respecting each other, they are rock solid. But if conflict is always avoided, if people are just smiling and nodding in the meeting and then complaining afterward, that's a major fault line.
Okay, next up, team development and inclusive collaboration. They sound related.
They are. Team development is about the long-term health of the ecosystem. It's my active willingness to invest in your success, sharing knowledge, giving helpful feedback, mentoring, even when it doesn't directly benefit me or my immediate goals. It shows we're focused on the collective win. And inclusive collaboration is the result of that. It's when you have shared ownership, true interdependence. It's having the guts to share a half-finished idea or to say, I don't know the answer, trusting that the team will build on it, not tear you down.
And if those two decay, you're basically just a group of individuals working in the same building.
You've lost your innovative capacity. You've lost your ability to grow.
All right, and the other two you flagged, feedback seeking and foresight.
Feedback seeking is such a clear litmus test for trust. In a healthy team, people actively look for critical feedback. They want to know their blind spots. It's a tool for growth. When trust plummets, that just vanishes. It's replaced by error hiding. People don't want correction anymore, they just want validation, because any correction feels like a threat to their job.
And foresight, how does that connect?
Foresight is about looking ahead. It's the ability to anticipate challenges, to see around the corner and shift strategy before you hit a wall. When a team starts to collapse, they lose this completely. They get stuck in reactive mode, constant firefighting. It feels very busy, very productive, but they've stopped asking the most important question. What's going to kill us in 6 months?
And that really gets to the heart of the contradiction we started with. You can have a team that is, by all accounts, successful. The quarterly reports are glowing. But these foundational behaviors, conflict resolution, feedback seeking, they're already in ruins.
That's the chasm, the gap between the performance data and the behavioral truth. Performance metrics are always looking backward. They're the ghost of past effort. A team can keep those numbers up for a surprisingly long time just by burning people out or by running on old processes that no longer really work. They might be shipping the product, but the cost in trust and energy and engagement is astronomical. That decay in the process is the signal. The system is running on borrowed time.
So if this collapse is a quiet erosion, not a sudden explosion, what's the actual mechanism? What's the invisible force driving it?
The term for it is hidden friction.
Hidden friction.
Think of it as a constant, subtle drag on everything the team does. It's made up of all these little behavioral misalignments that just build up over time. And this is key. It's almost never about someone's technical skills or a lack of resources. It's interpersonal. It's contextual. And because every little interaction creates ripples, these tiny misalignments start to compound. They create this dense, negative field around the team.
What are the sources of that friction? The things that create that drag but never, get put on a meeting agenda?
We can group them into 3 main buckets. The first is just simple misalignments. This happens when people have different ideas about what the priorities are, who's responsible for what, but, and this is the crucial part, they never actually talk about it to confirm. I might assume that speed is our #1 goal, while you assume it's perfect accuracy. We both work incredibly hard, but we're pulling in different directions, and that only comes out when we're at the deadline and things fall apart, leading to resentment.
So unverified assumptions.
Unverified assumptions are a huge source of friction. The second source is often more powerful, and that's emotional undercurrents. This is all the unspoken stuff, the anxiety about budget cuts, the tension after a reorg, or the absolute killer of team cohesion, perceived favoritism. When someone feels the system is rigged or that their contributions aren't valued, even if that's just a perception, it creates this deep, silent anxiety. And anxiety immediately triggers self-protective behaviors.
And the third source. You said it's why leaders miss the problem entirely.
It's the compounding effect. A single unverified assumption is a small problem. A moment of feeling slighted is, uncomfortable. But the cumulative effect of hundreds of these tiny behavioral compromises, day after day, is what becomes catastrophic. Organizations are good at spotting big, obvious problems. A server is down, a project is over budget. We can see that. But they are terrible at detecting the slow, microscopic buildup of behavioral friction. By the time it's visible in something like an employee engagement survey, the core damage is already done.
So friction is the mechanism.
Yeah.
But the fuel for that mechanism is the erosion of trust.
Absolutely. Hidden friction is the direct output of declining trust. As soon as trust begins to erode, every individual on the team makes this unconscious calculation. They shift from optimizing for the mission to optimizing for self-protection.
And what does that look like in practice?
It looks like me becoming more guarded. I start holding back information because sharing it might make me look bad or give you an advantage. I start playing politics to make sure my project gets resources. And that guarded behavior is friction, and it creates a vicious loop. My guardedness makes you not trust me, which makes you more guarded, which just adds more friction to the whole system. The collective mission is dead at that point. The team is just a collection of people optimizing for their own survival.
And this isn't just happening in a vacuum. The team's own culture, its unwritten rules, can actually encourage this dysfunction.
It enables it. The social norms are the operating system. They dictate what gets rewarded and what gets punished. For example, if your team's norm is to celebrate crisis heroics, the person who stays all weekend, to fix a problem that better planning could have prevented,
You're actually rewarding bad planning.
you're structurally incentivizing it. That norm creates friction. Or if the norm is that nobody ever disagrees with the boss in a meeting, then all the important feedback goes underground. It turns into resentment and backpaneling. When the norms reward looking good over being honest, the system is actively choosing to be dysfunctional.
Okay, so as this hidden friction builds up, the way the team works fundamentally changes. They don't just stop working, but something critical is lost. They stop truly collaborating. To really get this, I think we need to be very clear about the different ways teams can work together.
Yes, the hierarchy here is essential. There are 3 levels: communication, cooperation, and collaboration. Communication is a baseline. It's just exchanging information, sending a status update, forwarding an email. It's necessary, but it doesn't create anything new. Then you have cooperation. That's the next level up. This is parallel work. We're working side by side on our own pieces of a project and coordinating to make sure they fit together. I own my part, you own yours.
And then the gold standard, collaboration.
Collaboration is the highest level. It requires high trust and real interdependence. We have shared ownership of the outcome. We're solving a problem together. And it demands vulnerability. You have to be willing to share a messy, incomplete idea and trust that the group will help build it, not shoot it down. Collaboration is where innovation happens.
So when friction increases and trust drops, the team doesn't just stop. It regresses. It falls back down that ladder.
It's a survival mechanism. Collaboration feels too risky. If I don't trust you, I'm not going to be vulnerable with my ideas. So the team retreats to the safety of cooperation. And this is the great trap for leaders because it maintains the illusion of productivity.
Because tasks are still getting done. The assembly line is still moving.
Exactly. People are busy, they're coordinating, the structure of work is still there. From the outside, it looks fine. But what's been lost are the conditions for solving complex problems, for real breakthroughs. They're ticking boxes, not moving mountains. They've chosen the comfort of predictable tasks over the ambiguity of true problem solving.
That illusion of productivity must be so powerful, especially if leadership is only looking at those short-term metrics.
It's the ultimate blind spot. And this whole retreat, this regression, gets put on hyperspeed anytime there's organizational change, any kind of change, really, no matter how well-intentioned.
Why is change such a potent stressor? What does it do to the team's identity?
Change, by its nature, introduces ambiguity. Priorities are shifting, roles are unclear, power dynamics are in flux. In a healthy, high-trust team, that ambiguity might be seen as an opportunity, a puzzle to solve together. But in a low-trust, high-friction environment, ambiguity is read as threat. For most people, it's not what can I gain, it's what am I about to lose, my status, my relevance, my job. That anxiety forces an immediate retreat into self-protective, defensive behaviors.
Can you give us some concrete examples of those defensive shifts? What does that look like in someone's daily work?
Oh, absolutely. You see these clear pivots in the behavioral domains. Let's take planning and focus. A leader who normally operates at the strategic 30,000-foot level suddenly dives deep into the weeds. They become obsessed with task lists and daily check-ins. It's micromanagement. Why? Because they're swapping the scary ambiguity of the future for the comfort and control of a checklist. Control feels safer than complexity.
I've definitely seen that happen. What about in a domain like influence?
That's another huge one. The domain is influence without authority. In a healthy team, people use their expertise to persuade others and build consensus. They take ownership. When trust collapses, they abandon influence and retreat to rigid compliance. They will only do exactly what they are told. They document every single instruction. They refuse to take any action that isn't explicitly in their job description. They're not trying to find the best solution anymore. They're trying to avoid blame.
Which means things like initiative and judgment must also just disappear?
They evaporate. Initiative, the willingness to see a problem and step up to solve it, is replaced by apathy. If the unspoken rule is that failure gets punished, then the safest move is to do nothing. And with judgment, instead of using their experience and wisdom to make a nuanced decision, people just fall back on rigid rules and processes. They stop thinking and just start following policy, even if the policy makes no sense in the situation. It's all about self-protection.
The amazing thing about this behavioral approach is that the warning signs are always there. They're subtle. They live in the unspoken parts of our interactions. So what are those tiny interpersonal cues that can tell us a team is eroding long before it shows up in the numbers?
You have to learn to read the emotional frequency of the room. One of the most telling signs is subtle silences. I'm not talking about an entire team being quiet. I'm talking about the one or two people who are usually your most innovative, most engaged contributors suddenly pulling back. They speak less. They offer fewer ideas. They're withdrawing their intellectual energy. Why? Because they've calculated that the risk of contributing, the risk of being shot down or ignored, is now higher than the reward. Their silence is not agreement. It's a retreat.
And conflict doesn't just go away, right? It just goes underground and gets toxic.
Exactly. It morphs into passive conflict. You see a huge spike in sarcasm, cynicism, those overly dramatic sighs in a meeting. It's all veiled hostility. It's how people express disagreement when they're too afraid to say it directly. It allows them to release that tension without actually making themselves vulnerable. It's incredibly corrosive to trust.
What about that weird shift where everything becomes super formal all of a sudden?
Ah, yes. Formalization. That's a huge red flag.
Right.
When a quick, honest conversation feels too risky, teams retreat to the safety of process and documentation. A 5-minute chat becomes a long email chain with 5 people CC'd. People are no longer trying to solve the problem. They're trying to build a paper trail to protect themselves. It's about covering your back, not moving forward.
And all of these signals feed into this death spiral, this feedback loop that just makes everything worse.
It's called the perception loop, and it's what locks the system into decline. Let's walk through it. Imagine a manager makes a tough decision about resources. One person on the team, let's call her Sarah, feels it was unfair to her group. That's the emotional undercurrent. So she starts acting in a guarded way. Maybe she's a little slow to share some data in the next meeting. Now, her colleague Tom sees this. He doesn't know she feels slighted. He just sees her withholding information, and he interprets it as incompetence. Or maybe even hostility. His distrust is reinforced. So what does Tom do? He starts documenting all his interactions with Sarah. He sends follow-up emails confirming everything. His guarded behavior is amplified. Sarah sees this increased formality from Tom and takes it as proof that the environment is hostile and unsafe, confirming her original fear. The system just spirals downward.
So given that these signals are everywhere, why do leaders, the very people who are supposed to be the stewards of the team's health, why do they so often miss this until it's a total crisis?
It's because most leaders are rewarded for outcomes, not for process. They're looking at the finish line, not checking the engine oil. There are 4 classic blind spots that are just devastating.
Okay, what's blind spot number 1?
Equating silence with alignment. This is a killer. A leader presents an idea, asks any questions or concerns, and is met with silence. They think, great, everyone's on board. But in a low-safety environment, silence isn't alignment. It's unspoken dissent. It means people are too afraid to voice their concerns. So they'll nod in the meeting and then let the project die through passive resistance later.
Blind spot number 2.
Assuming cooperation means collaboration. A leader sees people coordinating their work, hitting their individual deadlines, and they tick the teamwork box. They're mistaking the mechanics of cooperation for the magic of true collaboration. They're celebrating the completion of tasks while being completely blind to the fact that the team's ability to innovate has been totally extinguished.
Blind spot 3.
Failing to detect the emotional undercurrents. This is a basic failure of emotional intelligence. A leader is focused only on the what, the data, the plan, the logic. They completely ignore the how, the anxiety in the room, the tension, the feeling of unfairness. But ignoring those emotions doesn't make them go away. It just forces them to come out sideways as friction and passive conflict. You can't fix a behavioral problem with a spreadsheet.
And the final blind spot.
Mistaking compliance for commitment. Compliance is when people do what they're told because they fear the consequences if they don't. It's driven by authority. Commitment is when people do what needs to be done because they believe in the mission. It's driven by ownership. A compliant team can look very efficient, but they're fragile. Leaders who can't tell the difference are fundamentally misreading the health and resilience of their own team.
And when you have all these blind spots at once, the meeting itself just becomes a piece of theater.
It becomes the performative meeting. It's the ultimate sign that psychological safety is dead. In that meeting, no one shares a new or risky idea. Everything presented is fully baked, polished, and defensible. Dissent is gone. The meeting isn't for exploration anymore. It's a stage for people to affirm decisions that have already been made and to prove they've done their work, all while avoiding any real scrutiny. The team has unanimously, if silently, agreed to prioritize looking good over being good.
Okay, to really get to the root of this, we need to understand the fundamental pressures that exist in any team. There are these 5 structural tensions. They aren't problems you can solve once and for all. They're constant forces you have to manage. And if you don't manage them, they become chronic sources of friction.
That's the perfect way to frame it. These are trade-offs. The health of a team isn't about eliminating them. It's about how consciously and actively they navigate the push and pull. When leaders ignore them, the team will always, always default to the path of least resistance, the safest, easiest option. And that path always leads to more friction.
All right, let's walk through them. First up, autonomy versus alignment.
This is the classic balancing act. Individuals need a sense of ownership and freedom to do their best work. That's autonomy. But the team needs to be sure everyone is pulling in the same direction toward a common goal. That's alignment. If you lean too hard into autonomy, you get fragmentation. Everyone's busy, but they're not coordinated. If you lean too hard into alignment, you get micromanagement that kills all creativity.
And in a collapsing team, I have to imagine the default is fragmentation.
Of course. Because when you're in self-protection mode, you retreat to your silo. It's the only thing you feel you can control. And that creates massive friction later when you have to try and integrate everyone's fragmented work.
Okay, next tension. Speed versus accuracy.
The constant pressure to deliver faster versus the need to deliver high-quality, correct work. In today's world, the pressure for speed is immense. But when a struggling team defaults to speed all the time, they start cutting corners. This creates a huge amount of technical debt and also, I'd say, emotional debt. People know they're not doing their best work, and that creates resentment. It leads to a constant state of firefighting.
Number 3 is the big one for long-term survival. Risk versus safety.
This is about the trade-off between innovation, trying new things that might fail, and predictability, doing the safe thing that's guaranteed to work. In a collapsing team, the default is always safety. Always. Any idea that might lead to failure or even just uncomfortable debate gets shut down, so they stop innovating. They become masters of just maintaining the status quo.
The 4th tension feels very cultural. Individual recognition versus collective success.
Yeah, this is about what your culture celebrates. Does it celebrate the hero, the star performer who saved the day? Or does it celebrate the team that succeeded together? If all the rewards go to the individual hero, you are structurally discouraging people from collaborating or helping their teammates. You're encouraging them to focus only on their own personal narrative, which just accelerates the siloing.
And the last one, transparency versus discretion.
This is about the flow of information, balancing the need to be open and share everything, even bad news, versus the need to be discreet and protect sensitive information. When trust is low, the default is always discretion, but it manifests as information hoarding. People hold on to information because knowledge is power, and sharing it feels like giving up an advantage. This hoarding makes misalignment 10 times worse and just shoots friction through the roof.
So the big picture here is that when these tensions are ignored, the team defaults to the safest, easiest option every time.
Fragmentation, speed over quality, risk aversion, individual glory, and information hoarding. That becomes the team's unconscious strategy, and it slowly suffocates them.
And once that friction is just the water they're swimming in, how does that warp the way they make decisions?
It creates a distortion that, again, can look like efficiency from the outside. The first thing you see is false consensus. Decisions get made really fast. Why? Because nobody with a dissenting opinion is willing to speak up. So everyone nods in the meeting, the decision is made, but there's zero buy-in. That dissent just manifests as foot dragging and passive resistance during the execution phase.
And that leads to the second distortion, hollow efficiency.
The decision is made quickly, it looks good in the meeting notes, but it's completely hollow. It lacks the emotional and intellectual commitment from the team to actually make it successful. The team is moving fast, but they're not actually going anywhere important. They're just spinning their wheels.
This all seems to be building toward a final catastrophic failure point. The complete breakdown of how the team handles conflict.
This is the tipping point. This is where the toxicity becomes undeniable. We have to make a final, crucial distinction here between task conflict and relationship conflict. Healthy teams have tons of task conflict. They argue passionately about the idea, the strategy, the data. It's productive friction. It makes the final product better. Collapsing teams devolve almost entirely into relationship conflict. The arguments are no longer about the work. They're personal. They're driven by identity threat and emotional baggage.
And what's the trigger that flips that switch from a healthy debate to a personal attack?
It's the moment when the assumption of positive intent is gone. It's when I stop believing that your critical feedback is intended to make the idea better, and I start believing it's intended to make me look bad. Once you stop assuming your colleagues are trying to help, every disagreement feels like a personal attack. And at that point, collaboration is dead. The team is just a collection of warring factions.
We started this whole conversation by saying our goal was to find the behavioral truth. And we often think of culture as these lofty value statements on a poster. But the real definition is much more grounded, isn't it?
It's much more brutal. For the purpose of diagnosing a team's health, the only useful definition of culture is this. Culture is the sum of the behaviors your organization is willing to tolerate. You can have innovation written in giant letters in the lobby, but if management consistently tolerates passive aggression and punishes anyone who takes a smart risk that fails, then your actual culture is one of fear and avoidance. In these silently collapsing teams, the tolerated behaviors are always negative, defensive, and self-protective.
So what are those specific behaviors that come to define this culture of decay?
It's the normalization of all the bad habits we've been talking about. Ignoring conflict becomes standard operating procedure. That low-grade hum of anxiety is just the background noise everyone gets used to. Hoarding information isn't seen as a problem, it's just seen as how you have to operate to get things done. When the system tolerates all of this, the collapse is no longer an event that might happen. It's the new dysfunctional reality. They're not solving problems anymore, they're just working around them.
So let's bring it all together. Let's trace the whole arc from that first tiny crack to the final cultural rot.
It's a chain reaction, really. It starts with a decline in trust, maybe from some unmanaged tension. That immediately generates hidden friction, the misalignments, the unspoken anxieties. To protect themselves from that friction, individuals begin a retreat from collaboration, falling back to the safety of mere cooperation. This retreat is characterized by a system-wide shift to self-protective behaviors, hoarding, compliance, micromanagement. Those behaviors create systemic dysfunction, where decisions are hollow and productivity is an illusion. That dysfunction eventually boils over into constant toxic relationship conflict, which finally cements itself as a wholesale cultural decay, where all these negative, low-trust behaviors become the norm. It's a perfectly engineered negative feedback loop.
And the sobering takeaway here for anyone listening is that if you're only looking at your quarterly reports, you are completely blind to this entire process unfolding right in front of you.
Completely blind. The behavioral truth, not the performance data, is your earliest and most reliable warning system. You have to shift your focus from the outcome, which is already in the past, to the process, which is creating your future. Those little whispers of friction you noticed today, the sarcasm in a meeting, the hesitation to share a new idea, that sudden insistence on formal emails, those aren't just personality quirks. Those are the early warning signs of a structural failure. #outro.
This has been a really powerful deep dive, not just as a diagnostic tool for a team, but also as a kind of mirror for our own actions. That framework identity to behavior to story to signal, it forces you to ask some tough questions about yourself. I think the most important takeaway is to really start noticing what patterns are guiding your decisions when things get stressful or ambiguous at work. Are you contributing to clarity and trust? Or are you, maybe without even realizing it, falling back on those self-protective behaviors like just being compliant or holding information a little too close? We have to look past the pretty numbers and see the messy human behavioral reality.
And maybe we can leave you with one final thought to take back to your own teams. Think about those 5 structural tensions we discussed. Autonomy versus alignment, speed versus accuracy, risk versus safety. First, identify which one feels most active, most tense in your team right now. Then ask, what is the default safe option our team is collectively choosing in that tension? And what invisible friction is that safe choice creating? And finally, how can you ensure that your own contribution is driven by genuine commitment to the mission and not just passive, fearful compliance? The answer to that really determines whether your team is truly high-performing or just performing well on its way to a quiet collapse.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the behavioral truth of team collapse.